Well, I have the great privilege of being here with Pastor Bret Allen, Superintendent of NorCal Nevada District Assemblies of God. And that's just his most recent title. But I think really, when I first came to know the Lord, I was with Cal Marcia Bethke, and you had already been with them for a long time. And so uh, I don't want to get into it too quick, but I think probably the way in which, and I think you'll like this, the way in which I was introduced to Pastor Bret Allen was through watching your illustrated messages on DVD. So that's how I was first introduced. So glad to have you on Nexplorers. It's really a privilege.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's a great privilege to be able to spend some time talking about leadership, concepts around leadership, and certainly appreciate you counting me as worthy to be one of those that's on your program. So thanks.
Absolutely. Well, just keep in mind, the only people listening are you, me, my mom, and my dad. So it's not a lot of pressure. So I would say, let's start here. Like, did you always know you're going to be in ministry? Was that Bret as a young man's thought? I mean, you tell me.
No, I always was very open in my life to whatever the Lord wanted me to do. I did go to Bible college. I didn't finish Bible college. I started Bible college. I ended up graduating from university. And in my pursuit of education, what happened is I just simply couldn't afford the bills at Bible college anymore. I was paying as I went. I graduated from university debt free, worked several jobs to pay my way through school. And I couldn't do that at Bible college. I could do it at university. And I just said to the Lord, I'm leaving Bible school, but I'm not leaving the idea of ministry. And you know where I am, you know my address. And if you want me to do that, the answer is yes, but you just let me know.
I love
So
it.
I pursued my education and I got into business and I was a salesperson. And I I thoroughly enjoyed business. I thoroughly enjoyed sales, and I was very content spending my life in that kind of a format. And all the while continuing to say, Lord, I'm here, I'm available. You just let me know if there's something you want me to do besides being a salesman, and I'm certainly available. So it was an idea, Jordan, I was wide open to, but never in pursuit of.
Yeah.
I grew up in a businessman's home. As you know, my dad's a pastor, but my dad didn't become a pastor until I was in my first year of college. So I grew up in a businessman's home. I didn't grow up in a pastor's home. My dad became a pastor a little later in life. And so for me, it was very natural to say, I can pursue ministry while I'm a salesman. And I know that God can move me from this to that. It just seemed very natural to me. And that's exactly what ended up happening.
I like that. I think I'll use that. Lord, you know my address, so here I am. I like that. It's dangerous prayer, I imagine too.
Yeah, yeah, he's got an ability to to tap you on the shoulder. That's for sure.
That's true. Well, that I think that's an interesting route. Maybe for me, I never did that. I got saved, when I was young, 18, and then I blinked my eyes and I was an intern. I blinked my eyes and I had already gone through Bible college, and so maybe from your perspective, what were some misconceptions maybe you had about ministry, or maybe what you thought, and then when you stepped into it? And obviously now, how many years have you been in ministry?
Man, boy, that's a great question. I was, if you count my volunteer time in ministry as well, I grew up in the church. I grew up in youth group leadership and those types of things, but probably got pretty active in ministry around 1980. So just a few years, about 40, been active in ministry.
Wonderful.
My vocational ministry started in 86. So
a fun fact about 1986 is that was the year I was born. So I hope yeah, that's awesome.
Well, that's very good. That's when I had my first youth ministry position afforded me.
Wow. And where was that?
I was, my first youth pastor position was in Concord, California.
Yeah.
At a Korean United Methodist church.
Oh, wow.
I was the only Anglo in the church.
Wow.
And I was asked to come in and help with the youth ministry that had been through 9 youth pastors in a 10-month span. And it
So,
was
so, so no big deal,
a pretty
easy.
defiant little group of dudes,
Yeah.
and still have contact with some of those kids to this day. So
Wow.
it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I was there for 5 years, and I loved it.
Wow.
And many challenges, being the only Assemblies of God guy on staff when Jimmy Swaggart and Jimmy Baker were having some national headlines.
Mm.
Uh, but boy, it was a very wonderful, shaping and informative time. Not easy. I was bivocational most of that time,
Yeah.
and so there were some decent challenges in that.
So in that, you've been in the business world and you've been in ministry for 40 years. Maybe a lot of people potentially don't know maybe what the difference is. What are some misconceptions you think now? And you've been a leader of leaders, I think, since the time I was stepping into ministry. You weren't just leading a ministry, but you were leading leaders that led ministry. So what do you think maybe are some misconceptions that people might think about the ministry that you've really been able to discover over this time in ministry together?
Well, I was on an airplane not too long ago and sat down in a seat, and the person next to me, this is all before COVID, of course, while we still were flying around.
Uh,
And the person said to me, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "I work with pastors. I encourage pastors and I help equip pastors to be able to lead their churches and their ministries." And the person said to me, "Oh, what a wonderful job. You must have no problems because you're only working with pastors." I
Beautiful.
think that's one of the misconceptions in ministry.
Hmm.
You're in church, you're around church, you're around Christian people, you're around the things of God, you're in an environment where there's prayer and worship, and you're at church on Sunday and Wednesday and Sunday night, and you have staff devotions and staff prayer. There must not be any problems.
Hmm.
I think that a lot of people, when they become new in ministry, are shocked to find out the level of conflict, controversy, difficulty, and problem solving that goes along with ministry. I think it catches a lot of people off guard.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. And I think your office and some of the people you work with see it a lot.
Sure.
Um, well, how about this? Is there anything that you thought you believed going into ministry that now you're like, ooh, I'm not so sure? You go back and tell young Bret Allen 40 years ago, hey, you need to change your mind about this when it comes to ministry. Is there anything like that?
Yeah, if I went back and talked to young Bret Allen, I would tell him, in every situation, process has great value. And you don't have to win every conversation. You don't have to fix it in a single conversation. You can revisit it and revisit it and revisit it over a 6-month period of time, over a year-long period of time. That process is health in the decision making. That sometimes when you double down and you win an argument, you win the argument, you just don't get to lead the change. You just have nullified yourself and quieted your own voice in the process of winning the argument, instead of allowing the conversation to continue as long as it needs to continue for there to be a healthy resolve and a healthy change. I was very good at making sure that you knew my opinion, and that my opinion was what you walked away with.
Hmm.
And I won a lot of arguments and I won a lot of debating that I never got to lead the change because of the fact that it was too expensive in the win.
Wow.
And I think that patience and tolerance and saying, I see your point on that. Let's you and I talk about this again down the road a little bit. It doesn't all have to get fixed in one conversation.
Yeah. Wow. I'm not so sure that's the template in which I use currently in my life. But it's true. I think that probably has led to more peace between you and a person.
Oh, absolutely. And when you get there, you both know how you got there.
Yeah.
And when you look at somebody that is opposed to you, the goal is never, let's say that number one is extreme opposition, and number 10 is complete compliance with your opinion.
Yeah.
The goal is never moving somebody from number 1 to number 10. The goal in every conversation is to move them from 1 to 2.
Right.
And that's enough.
Yeah.
And then in the next conversation, I move you to 2.5. And if I'm looking at the scale and saying, we're not in agreement on this, but over the time, I am going to continue to approach this through honor, through respect, through biblical principle, through brotherhood, through relationship,
Mm.
then the chances of me having a long-lasting win in that situation are very, very good. If I can out argue you, or I just have a strong, intimidating personality that can overpower you, that's not that change is not gonna that's not gonna have any value. It's not
Right.
gonna have any benefit.
Right. That's really good. I mean, especially for you. I mean, if you come rolling into that meeting on your Harley or something, I feel like I would have already lost that conversation. That's awesome. That's really good. Well, I think 2020, and I'm speaking for you here, and I want you to speak to it, but I can only imagine that 2020 has been one of the weirder years for you as a leader. I think a funny example of that is just tuning into district council this year. I'd love to hear your come on, give me some of your real thoughts about how that was sitting at that desk and all that. I mean, what was that like?
Well, it's very odd to sit at a desk and look at a camera and know that you're talking to the largest district council
Yeah.
audience of credentialed ministers of all time, that
Yeah.
you literally are touching all the corners of the world through a district council at the same time, while the only individuals in the room, because of social distancing and all of those types of things, are the executive officers and a couple of technical personnel.
Yeah.
My mom and dad were there, um, uh, and they were brought in a little bit later on to have a word of prayer with me.
Mhm.
But it's a very interesting feeling. It's a very odd feeling, but at the same time, it was a really wonderful victory for the district council.
Yeah.
Jordan, for lots and lots of years, I grew up in this district as a youth pastor, and I senior pastored in this district, and um, it's not been more. It's not only been once that the district has been accused of not being on the cutting edge of something, as far as either a ministry approach or a technology approach or whatever. And for us to be out in the front like that and to be able to do something of that magnitude at an event that really is very traditional for us,
Yeah.
and for us to be able to transition that into a very cutting edge a methodology was very rewarding. There was one other district in the nation that had done some sort of an online presentation, and then we were the next day. And so our phones lit up because we had the national office watching, and they're trying to figure some things out. And it's just nice. I believe we're in one of those districts that should be setting the way and
Yeah.
should be setting the tone and things like that, just because of where we're positioned in the world with technology. And it was nice. It was a very rewarding thing. Weird, different, but really good. And
Yeah.
weird and different and really good. It's amazing how often that goes together.
Yeah. That was good. It was. I found out, or I heard once I was watching the attendance number, and it just made me step back and go like, wow, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I need to celebrate that. You know, at first I had to remind myself that should be celebrated. You know that,
Right.
wow. You know, and
Yeah.
but it felt like we were losing. You know, because we weren't together and all the stuff's going on. But then again, look what God was doing. It's just a man. This whole thing has been interesting, which is kind of what I go ahead.
And, the easiest thing to do is to say, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put all of our business off till next year.
Yeah.
And I have friends that did that. They're just going to say, hey, it's just not worth the hassle. We'll just go ahead and button it all up next year. We'll have a couple of a little bit longer business. We'll just get through it all next year. No problem with those who did that. I just didn't want to do that. I really saw this as an opportunity for us to move the ball down the field in our ability to do things differently.
Mm.
And anytime we can put a new tool in our tool belt, yeah, we need to grab that opportunity to pick up a new tool. So we picked up a new tool.
Yeah.
Now that's one side, is we picked up a new tool. The B side of that is people expect you to use the new tools you pick up.
Yeah. That
So
was what I was going to ask you.
sure, you think this is all going to go back in the box? It's not all going back in the box next year.
Mm.
I guarantee our missionaries enjoyed being a part of
Oh
district
yeah.
council.
Oh yeah.
And if we're going to, there's no way we're going to turn around and be able to say, oh, and by the way, that was a one-time deal and now you're all excluded again.
Mm.
I'm telling you, that is not going to go over. So it was wonderful. It was kind of exciting, but it was also setting a new tact for us and how we're going to handle that part of our council.
Wow. That's and waking up in January 2020, you'd have never thought that, and here we are,
Yep.
which is that's one of the questions I want to ask you, which I think will be helpful, and especially if there's some pastors, ministers listening. What have you learned, and like what do you think you're learning through all this? So that's a small example. Wow, we have some abilities, we have some tools that maybe we weren't using, and that's great. But I mean, like the Bret that lays his head down at night, that person, what has he learned thus far, and what do you feel like you're in the process of learning?
I have battled a frustration in my life that has really come to rest in me the first 6 months of this year. I am a real believer in the church. And I think that when Jesus said in Caesarea Philippi, I'll build my church, the ownership that Christ took of the church put a preeminent significance upon it. And so I have always adhered to the idea that the church, big C, is enormously significant. I get tired of articles that run the church down. I get tired of books that are written for no other purpose than to point out the flaws of the church, the inabilities of the church, the inflexibility of the church, the out-of-step nature of the church, the rigid nature of the church, the fact that churches are behind generationally, they're ineffective, they're just not doing a good job. I bristle at that type of a thing because of the fact that Jesus said, I'll build my church. It's something he's proud of. It's something he loves. It's something that he gave himself for. And I don't like it when we run the church down. So if the podcast goes that way, I click off. If the article starts going that way too far, I don't finish it. If the book has 19 chapters about everything that's wrong with the church, and they haven't been able to bring any social redeeming information to all of their research, and it doesn't end on a positive note on the church, then I disengage. I can't do that. And so here we are in 2020. We have 450 churches. We're across 2 states, 61 counties. And I watched big churches, small churches, churches pastored by ethnic ministers, by elderly ministers, by female ministers in all kinds of different cities in 7 days adapt to a brand new way of doing church. I know guys who were saying, we don't need an online presence. We don't want an online presence. I don't understand it. I don't want to be a part of it. 7 days later, we're projecting their sermons to a congregation that felt the same way, and they were watching it on Facebook.
Yeah.
Now, that kind of adaptability, that kind of flexibility, that kind of an ability to pivot only belongs to an organization. Nobody in society adapted as quickly as the church. In 7 days, from the time we shut everything down by county orders or state order, and then ultimately a federal order, within 7 days, I don't care who they were, where they were, how old they were, where they were from, they pivoted and they had it working. That tells me, I learned something in that moment, that the church is far more adept. The church is far more capable of transitioning itself in the needs of the moment than we ever gave her credit for. And it excites me. It pleases me. I celebrate it. And we've got more challenges ahead of us. But what I'm learning is we've already demonstrated a great ability to be able to handle challenge in step, no matter. And I'll tell you something that we just never heard about during that whole entire time. We never heard about, the big churches are so much better than the small churches. The small churches, they just don't. It all went away. Everybody started to learn that they had greater influence than they ever thought they had. that they were reaching numbers of people that they had no idea that even knew they existed. It was such a win for us. It was such a praise the Lord for the church. Our district, I'll tell you, I was proud from one end of our district to the other and across both states of the incredible effort that went out. And it was not easy. It was not cheap.
Yeah.
But doggone, I mean, we did it. And to me, that's one of the things I've learned through this time is just how good we can handle that kind of a change up.
That's awesome. It's true, man. What a wild 7 days. And just, I never would have thought about it necessarily until you said that. Just, there really was no talk, or there was no question about what size church. Why would it matter? At that point. Yeah.
You can only have 3 or 4 people. Doesn't matter how big the building is. You can only have 3 or 4 people in there. Yeah. Everybody's talking to a little red blinking light. It doesn't really matter how big the church is.
It's true. Wow. That's really good. You had spoken in a chapel service for SUM, the college ministry that we have at our church. And you said something in there that I was hoping you could expand on. And I think you probably would have in that online chapel service, but we were kind of limited on time. And you said that you believe that this is one of the great moments in time, but you also said that it needs to be managed well. And I thought, that I wrote it down, and I knew we were going to be talking, and I thought there's a lot to that. That's a big statement. I resonate with the first half, and I think many people do. I think especially Christ followers, there's this sense that God's up to something, and I think the hard part is, what do I do? And how do I manage this? And so maybe you can speak to that, because I think people would probably agree, this is a great moment in history. And you said, but it needs to be managed well. I was hoping I could launch you into, maybe pull up a pulpit, do what you need to do, and have at it.
Well, under the topic of stewardship, we do a great job when we talk about stewardship, about the stewardship of finance, the stewardship of time, the stewardship of additional resource outside just our money, the stewardship even of relationship. We do a very, very good job covering those. One of the topics that goes uncovered most of the time in a good stewardship presentation is the stewardship of opportunity. And I believe that when we stand before the Lord and we give an account of our lives and we have a conversation about the years that God gave us, one of the things that we're going to talk about, I'm convinced, are the opportunities that God afforded us and how we handled the opportunities afforded us. The parable of the talents was about an opportunity. One man was given this many and this many and this many to the other 2, and they were given an opportunity to do something. Right. The reward was more on how an opportunity was utilized than a dollar amount. Mm-hmm. If those who had the most dollars were the most faithful, then that would be a silly way to distinguish how people are faithful. It's not about dollar amounts. It's about capitalizing opportunity. And I believe that when opportunity comes along, sometimes God's been working 5 years, 10 years for an opportunity to cross your path. And the management of all of that energy and effort expended by the Lord to bring that across your path, I believe, is a very important thing to the Lord. Yeah. And I believe that's why scriptures are in the Bible, that you make the most of, you're living as the wise, making the most of every opportunity, because opportunities are not only time sensitive, but they are created, I believe, by God to come across our path. And if we can learn that when opportunity comes, many times opportunity is well cloaked as a problem. But if you get to the core of that problem, it's opportunity. Mm-hmm. And the management of that can move the church ahead, can move you ahead, can move a marriage ahead, can move a country ahead if the opportunity is managed correctly. Now, mismanagement of opportunity is not seeing the opportunity. That's number one. Number two is complaining about the problem and never capitalizing on the opportunity that's behind the problem.
Right.
Lots of problems come only as a cloak, only as an introduction to a problem. And mature leadership that capitalize on opportunity have trained themselves that when a problem comes in, they say, what is the opportunity for us for betterment in our organization by dealing with this problem?
Yeah.
It's never just fixing the problem. It's how do we capitalize on what that problem represents to make us different, better, and more effective. And the church is facing that right now with COVID-19. How are we going to utilize this set of problem as the management of opportunity so that we are forever more effective moving ahead?
Yeah. And that would only come from taking a step back, because as you were talking about that, I think problems feel like they're 2 inches from your face, and so it's kind of all you can see. And then the only way to see the opportunity, which I think is further out, it takes some effort. It doesn't happen casually, I guess. Like you don't casually stumble into living a lifestyle of taking and looking for the opportunity. You casually walk into problems.
If I could spend just about 3 more minutes on this with you.
Absolutely.
When Moses was at the Red Sea, he's got the Red Sea in front of him and Pharaoh's army behind him. And in leadership, we just call this a bad day.
Yeah.
It's just flat out a bad day. You just go, really, Lord? I was just watching sheep on the backside of the wilderness, and you commandeer me through a bush that knows my name, and you bring me out here, and here I am. I'm going to get run over by an army standing by the seashore. That's the end of this story.
Right.
And the people didn't help. And there's a great lesson there that when you're leading a church or you're leading an organization and something happens, it's not always that you turn to the people you're leading to somehow get the answer for where you're supposed to lead them.
Wow.
That's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And when Moses is standing there, the people start saying all kinds of unfair things to him and making all kinds of accusation against him. And he does the most interesting thing. He turns to the Lord, and the Lord says, why are you calling out to me? Get your staff over the water. We already prepared you for this thing. Get the staff over the water and tell the people to move. And so Moses already has in his hands what he needs. God's already prepared him for the situation that he finds himself in, and there's going to be a victory. In that, if Moses had started arguing with the people about grave counts in Egypt, Pharaoh would have run over the top of him.
Yeah.
And the people are right here. They're the problem that's right in his face. And Moses did a brilliant thing. He sidestepped the accusation and addressed the issue. His answer to them was, don't be afraid. That was the issue. And behind all problems, behind all accusations, behind all of that stuff is an issue. And if you get caught up in the problem, if you get caught up in the accusation, you never have the privilege of addressing the issue. The issue is where the opportunity is.
Right.
There is going to be just in a little while, Miriam's going to be penning a new song about a horse and rider thrown into the sea. It's going to be a very, very good day in just a little while. But if Moses had mishandled that which was right in his face, the Pharaoh wins the day because the leader is involved in an argument and a debate instead of capitalizing on the opportunity that's in front of him.
Wow, that's true. And that's a tough place to be sometimes. It's way easier. I'm speaking for myself here. Way easier to turn.
And we have to believe in ourselves that when that thing hits our desk, that the timing of it is perfect. Wow. And that God has prepared us, or he never would have let it go. You see, when the children of Israel got over the Red Sea, when they got through the Red Sea and they're on the other side of the Red Sea, then the Lord took them the long way around where they had to go to help them avoid further conflict because he knew they weren't ready for it. That means that when I head into a problem, God has the right to steer that problem out of my direction for another 6 months if he needs to. Right. But when it hits my desk, I have to believe that not only is the timing right, but I'm prepared. Yeah. I am equipped. I have what I need to be able to handle that situation. And the timing is obviously what the timing should be.
Yeah. And so, and I guess I can ask you, and it's, you believe that that's truth about COVID-19 hitting in this day, in this moment, in this church? I think it goes along with what you said of what we were able to do in 7 days, but it still takes an addressing to really, to go, yeah, this didn't slip by the Lord,
Right.
And the church is ready. And
so I said this to the Lord. This is what I said to the Lord. I go, this is not good. I don't like this. But obviously, this is the time that we get to deal with this.
Yeah.
So, Lord, I believe with all my heart, we can have a victory in this.
Yeah.
And I have held that within myself every day of the last several months. That, yes, boy, there have been some very uncomfortable times. There have been some very difficult times. There have been some tragic times. And I continue to say to myself, Lord, you allowed this at this time across our desk. I know that we're up for it.
Yeah.
And that's the attitude I have done my very best to lead every day with.
Yeah.
And I don't like it. I don't want it, but here it is. And the best way for you and for me and for the pastors of our churches is not around it, it's through it. And God taught us that lesson at the Red Sea. Don't try to get around it. It's not going to work. Just get through it. Right. And we're going right through the heart of this thing right now.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, I wrote a couple of questions, sent them to you. What do you see as maybe one of your concerns? As a leader, you're addressing problems and you're looking for the opportunity behind them. But what concerns you? And like we're talking about, not from a standpoint of despair, but there are concerns on the horizon. There is a bunch of people marching towards me, and I am in front of a Red Sea. That's a concern.
Sure.
But then also, what's exciting you? You've spoken a little bit about it, but I think it's helpful to hear. What does Pastor Bret Allen see as a concern? And I'm looking too, not just for the obvious. Hey, we're not meeting like we were, but I mean, sometimes I think there's deeper concerns. Maybe it's not just we're not meeting, but what would that do to people's sense of community? Or something like that. But personal to you, what do you see as something concerning?
My concern is that during the COVID-19 time, we haven't lost one church, not one. Not one church has been closed down. Not one church has folded up and just said, "Hey." Now, that's not true across society, man. We have lost all kinds of businesses. We've lost in every other level of the society I live in, the community I live in. Man, there is all kinds of stuff that's shutting down. It's been there a long time. It's not coming back. We have not closed one church.
Wow, praise the Lord.
But the way we manage our way back out of the COVID-19 shelter in place type of a thing, and the way that we handle the new sensibilities of people, the fear of society, the expectations of people that are coming to our churches, we have a very strong possibility of losing churches in the way we lead out of this that we didn't lose the whole time through it. What COVID-19 couldn't kill, our leadership, if not handled correctly, could.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that concerns me, is there's a million opinions in the world right now around what to do and who's to blame and on and on and on. And what we need to be doing is focusing on the sensibilities, the problems that people are facing, the fact that for 3 months they have been scared to death by the evening news.
Yeah.
And that's how they're going to come back into church. And so one of my things I'm concerned about is that we do this absolutely to the best of our ability. It's not my job to tell churches, especially general council churches, what they're supposed to do. That's not my job. What my job is to resource, encourage, equip, train, exhort. That's my job as I see it. And so all of the help that I've given has been to try and help people be prepared to be able to lead for what's just ahead of us. And seeing it as an opportunity, understanding the times that we're in, reading the signs correctly, and leading in accordance to all of that, and not leading in accordance to a day gone by that's 90 days in our rearview mirror. Boy, that is what's going to determine how well we come out of this thing.
Yeah, that's great.
We have an online audience now that many churches never had. And one of my fears is that as we're debating about opening dates, and if we can open on this date, and who's saying what, that we're sending inadvertently a message to all those online people who have never ever been in our church that they're unimportant.
Right.
We're so busy arguing about when we get back together, are we sending a negative message to people that have started attending every single week, sometimes every single day in some situations? Are we telling them that they're still important to us?
That's great. That's
one of my concerns.
and just that question, we weren't thinking about that just a few months ago. That's a
Right.
great one. What are you excited about?
I just to kind of capitalize up what I said earlier, I'm excited about the proof that we have the ability to adapt, because this is not our last chance. This is not our last adaptation. It isn't that the church went through COVID-19 and now, oh, praise God, now it'll just be normal from now on. This came to prepare us, equip us, and to put some muscles in place, because there's something else coming.
Yep.
Now, for the last couple of years, I've made these statements while we were writing books and articles and pamphlets and everything else about millennials. Lots and lots of negative material put out about millennials.
So hurtful. Hurtful.
I know, man. And I kept saying this in different settings, that the millennials are uniquely different. They are uniquely put together by God for a specific purpose that is coming straight at us that we don't see and we don't understand. But when it gets here, they will see it and understand it in a way that we need them. Jordan, we're living in the reality of that statement that I've been making for about the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And the fact that all of a sudden, think about what's happened in the last 90 days to the value of the millennial in the Church of Christ. We went from people going, I got this millennial and it's this and it's that and it's this and it's that, to how do I hire 5 more? I need 5 more. I mean, they went from not wanting the one they had to trying to get 5 more around them.
Yeah. Sure.
What else could move that controversy from controversy to value as quickly as a problem? And all of a sudden, millennials have a place and they'll never be viewed the same. I love that. And that's just one shade of the spectrum that the church has been catapulted ahead. I think we're going to be figuring this out for decades.
Sure.
The benefits that have come out of these last 90 days.
Yeah.
One of them, though, is that it doesn't matter what age group that you're in. If you're a senior citizen or you're a middle ager or whatever, you're looking at those millennials and you're saying, thank God for them. You know, you mentioned our district council online earlier. Behind the scenes, behind the cameras, behind the lights, behind the switchboards and everything, all millennials. Every single one of them sitting on the backside of the lights was millennials. Wow. They are the ones who made district council happen. Wow. Jay and Sam and I, you left it to us. It would not have looked that good. It was the millennials that we have surrounded ourselves with, that we have valued and put into places of authority and position that carried that day.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I think a lot of people do. And it just makes me think about that God's smarter than we make him out to be, you know, and here we are. Here he is potentially equipping a generation for the next thing he wants to do. And
sure.
And then, as you said, it's a problem that brings it to the surface. You know, we need to.
You bet. And God says, look at the value that I have packed into your churches. Quit finding fault in this and that and this. Quit picking at it and just celebrate it. And if we can just learn how to celebrate each other, and we can learn to celebrate the fact that we see the thing differently, how much stronger do we get by celebrating the different vantage point that's being brought to bear on one issue?
Yeah.
Take the millennials out of this whole entire equation, and nothing that I said about our ability to pivot is nearly as true as it currently is.
That's good. It's true. And that's really, it's a lot to think about, and just on how God works, but then also it makes you start thinking about, wow, God, what really is to come, if you're equipping a generation for that. And you said something too, in a time we were together, and you said, focus on what is unseen. And I thought, well, sure, but what am I talking about here? And
Sure.
Talk about that a little bit. There's Ephesians 6:12. There's got to be so much unseen going on, and
Right.
and as a Christian, and I know that passage, that passage, but do we know, and how do we focus on what is unseen in a time like during this COVID-19 and how upside down things have been?
So what is seen is temporal, the scripture says, and what is unseen is eternal.
Yeah.
So I can't see eternal. I can't even fathom eternal, and I can't see the unseen. And yet the Bible tells me to focus on what is unseen and not what is seen. Now, what that reminds me of in my finite way of thinking, my finite perspectives, is that it's a reminder to me that the unseen God is always at work.
Yeah.
Always at work. And just because I can't see what he's doing doesn't mean he isn't doing. And so what I have to do is I have to train myself to focus on the fact that God is at work, and I need to be doing everything I can to keep step with what God's doing. Yeah. Now, if I focus on what's seen, I'm going to focus on what's temporal. And if I focus on what's temporal, my chances of missing what God's doing are much higher. And so there has to be an aspect of, while I'm dealing with the day, I'm dealing with the practical of the day. And Jordan, you've known me long enough to know that I really emphasize having good practical skills. Those need to be developed. But at the same time, I've got to keep an eye out over here, keep my eye on Jesus, the author and perfecter of my faith, keep my focus on what's unseen. Look at the commands we're given to look outside just what we see, because this is temporal, which means it's not going to be here very long. But what God's doing, that's going to last for an eternity. That's what I want to tie myself into, is that which is going to have staying power, and it's going to have eternal value. So I have to train myself that while I'm dealing with something, to say, this isn't it. There's something bigger than this. There's something outside what I'm seeing. And I have to know that. I have to believe that. If you don't, you overreact to people, you overreact to situations, you become a very reactive leader, and every single thing that comes along, you overreact. Yeah. And I can't afford to overreact. I have to be one of those guys that deals with the things to the best of my ability, with my understanding that God's in it and he's doing something.
Yeah. That's helpful. Was talking to Pastor John Jackson not too long ago and he was just saying living vertically, got to live vertically, and everything horizontally is temporal, and looking for answers horizontally is just impossible, where we go up, and that's really good. I thought you were going to say, what comes to mind when you say focus on what is unseen is the youth convention. See the unseen. That was your opportunity, and you wasted it right there to say,
that was a long time ago, but I do remember it.
You could have said you were planting those seeds in future millennials, and I set you up. I tried.
I know, man. I know.
That's funny. Well, just a couple more. One more for maybe the listener about where you could just encourage us a little bit, and then maybe just a couple questions about you personally, and then we'll be done. For the pastors, parishioners, those people who are heavily involved in their church, but they're bivocational and they're listening and they feel, how about what we talked about? Afraid. They're afraid. They would relate more to the people that Moses is speaking to more than they relate to Moses. And I know I've felt that way more than one time in these past few months. What would you say as an encouragement to them? And what can they do? I think that's a struggle in this season of knowing how to do. These pastors who find themselves at home, who can really only connect maybe via phone and things. I don't want to lead you too far down, but for those people who are feeling afraid, feeling scattered, what would you say is, how can they position themselves in this season, and for what purpose?
Well, first of all, we always preach fear with a little bit of a condemnation. We always kind of blast people a little bit for being afraid. I want to remind you that the Garden of Gethsemane is a picture of fear. Jesus was afraid. When you ask God, can we change the plan? And you throw yourself on the ground and you sweat blood. This is a picture of humanity on full display and fear.
Yeah.
I want to encourage people with this thought that if fear was something that God never expected us to encounter, it would not be addressed as frequently as it is in Scripture. It is a regular part of our lives. It is a regular theme in Scripture. It's a reality for us.
Yeah.
And so when you feel afraid, that's not sin. That's not the unpardonable sin. That's not denying God's reality. It's just fear. And for me, when I feel afraid, it is a check. And I say this to myself. When I feel afraid, I ask myself this question instantly: what should I be exercising faith in right now that I'm not?
Yeah.
Because when faith steps up, fear steps back. And when fear comes to the front, faith steps back. So if I'm feeling afraid, that means that fear has made my faith tail behind. What is it right now I should be exercising greater faith in, so that the fear will take a subservient role to the faith, the measure of faith that God has already invested in me? Mm-hmm. And so for me, fear has become a great friend to be able to function as a man of faith, because it's a great giveaway. It's a great indicator. It's a great help of exactly pinpointing where it is you need to put attention in the area of exercising faith. And to me, my fears, when I feel those fears, I feel those overwhelming sensations, that stifling set of sensations, boy, instantly I say, this is obviously an area that I have to refocus my faith. So that's a spiritual answer. But the practical side of that thing is training yourself to ask that question and then acting on it instantly. Jordan, we've known each other for years. We've never had this talk before. This is something that, this isn't something that I've gone through that's become sermon fodder. This is something I use in daily existence as a leader.
Yeah.
I sit and my phone rings and I pray, because I have no idea what's going to be on the other side of that phone any moment. I don't know what I'm going to be finding myself in the middle of. So for people who are at home, they're disconnected, they're afraid, man, I'll tell you what, this is a great time of equipping, self-training, self-realization, self-discovery in that relationship between fear and faith. And I will guarantee you the reason that you're going through what it is that you're going through is because whatever it is that you're picking up in the area of skill set and ability on the topic of fear and faith, you're going to need just down the road. And one of the great things about faith is you don't need more. The Bible says in Romans that not to think more highly of yourself, but in sober judgment, in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. God already invested enough faith in you to get you through every situation, circumstance in your life. You have all the faith you need. You have it. You just need to exercise it. When you start feeling afraid, one of the greatest ways for Bret Allen to exercise faith is to understand where he's afraid so he can start pushing the faith button and the faith quotient to the front. And I believe that we're in one of those times right now that extra faith action is going to be demanded up there. And we need to start working that faith muscle a little bit right now because we're going to need it right up there.
Absolutely. That's great. And that's true. And I would agree, sometimes that subject of fear comes up and it almost brings up some shame, and I think we could all take some time to reflect about the Garden of Gethsemane. And I think you said it well, that's a picture into humanity, not just one person via their personality and how they deal with fear. It really is into a picture of who we are. So thank you.
And there's two other things Jesus teaches us in the garden. When you're afraid, people aren't going to get you through it. Jesus turned to his closest friends, and they were not helpful to him in dealing with this situation.
You're right.
And a lot of the time when we're afraid, we really try and have people get us out of it or get us through it. And there are some things that in our life that God allows into our life that only he can fix. My spouse can't fix it. My parents can't fix it. My general superintendent can't fix it. Nobody can fix it. God allows things into my life that only he can fix because he wants me to lean on him. And the second thing that Jesus taught us in the garden is that prayer didn't change the circumstance. There was still going to be an arrest. There was still going to be torture. There was still going to be a death on a cross. All of those things were still going to happen. The only thing that changed in the garden was Jesus. Wow. Everything else stayed the same. And prayer doesn't change our circumstances. Prayer changes us, and God uses us to change the circumstances.
Yeah.
Jesus is going to fix the sin problem of mankind.
Yeah.
He's going to fix it.
Yeah.
And what had to happen first is prayer had to change him. He goes in, and the words in Luke say that he is sorrowful to the point of death. And then when Judas comes in, he says to the guys, "Arise, my betrayer is here." In other words, let's get after the events of the day. Let's go do this thing. Are you kidding? Leading your men into battle, healing a guy whose ear just got cut off, doing all of those things. How do you go from sorrow to the point of death to healing a guy's ear and saying to your disciples, let's get after the events of the day? The only thing that happened between those was time with the Father.
Yep.
Prayer altered him.
Yeah.
Prayer alters us.
Yeah.
And so those are great lessons from the garden.
Massive. I mean, so true about when you're afraid. Man, I don't know if people help, but the Father does. So good.
Sure.
I'm so appreciative of that, Pastor Bret. And well, man, I'm going to ask you one more thing. I wish we could just keep going, but you're in your office. I'm not in mine.
Your mom's already quit listening. So
Exactly. So we're good. Yeah. Well, she might listen more than once, so who knows? But, I want to just ask you about you. You're not just Superintendent Bret Allen going through this. You're a person too. You're a husband. You're a dad. You got friends. And, so you're spending your time. And I think when it comes to the idea behind Nexplorers as a podcast is just kind of staying hungry, and chasing after the Lord as he's leading, but also looking, and so I would love to just hear from you as we close. What keeps you curious? What are some of your influences when it comes to being who you're meant to be in the Lord? And maybe what's something you're exploring? You just got reelected. Congratulations.
Thank you.
more people were a part of that than ever, so you've obviously done something right there. And I think I speak for everybody when we say thank you for your leadership and the investments. I'm
My,
sure you're never going to know
hmm,
until it's
hmm.
until you need to when the day comes. But I know how thankful I am. And but you're an influence for me. But what are some influences for you? And what keeps you on the journey? And I know you're dreaming about something different than you were 40 years ago in 1986. So
Sure, sure.
tell us a little bit where you're at, and then we'll go.
Every position that I've held, I didn't look for. I never, as a matter of fact, I worked for my father. My dad was a senior pastor. I was a youth pastor. And he told me, he said, one day you're going to be a very good senior pastor. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not going to happen in my life. And I'm not going to do that. I have no interest in that. And so in answer to that, I worked for him for 7 years. Once a month, he would take me to lunch and we would spend the entire lunch. And he would say to me, so I want to talk to you about when you're a senior pastor. And I would say, I'm not going to senior pastor. He would say, that's fine, but we're going to talk about what's going to happen when you are and some things you need to know.
Yeah.
And so we would have that conversation. I did senior pastor. God opened that door really, really cool. I never had on my list of desires or goals to be a district superintendent, but I love what I'm doing. And I was very willing to step into, I told God early on, as I mentioned, you have my address, you tell me, and the answer is already yes. You just got to tell me and tell Val, and the answer is already yes. We'll do whatever you ask us to do. So that's always been that way. So what keeps me kind of leaning in and what keeps me kind of excited is I know that the Bible says, behold, I'm doing a new thing, that God's doing something new all the time. I get to be a part of it. And I have no idea what God's preparing me for. But I know that not only is this season a fruition of preparation, but it's preparation for whatever. I don't have any idea. Maybe I retire here. Maybe I finish out. I don't know. But I do know that God knows. And it keeps me wanting to handle today correctly, handle the problems of today correctly, handle the opportunities of today correctly, because I know their preparation. And that keeps me so curious and it keeps me so hungry. It's so interesting how I look back over my life and everywhere I've been and everything I've done has prepared me for this moment. Well, this moment is preparation just as much as it's fulfillment of preparation.
Yeah.
And so that's exciting to me.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. It's, I've never, it's not like a sales career where you look at your wife over dinner and you go, is this it? Is this all I'm going to accomplish? I'm just going to be selling these. No, there is a depth and an unknown and kind of an internal excitement all the time about what is this leading to? Where are we going? Where are we going as a district? Where are Val and I going as a couple? Where am I going as a minister? What I don't know. I mean, it's just that's the excitement of the unknown versus the fear of the unknown. For me, I'm excited about walking into an undeclared future.
Great. That's a great answer. And I think we're excited that you're excited. If you weren't, I think we'd be nervous, but from my perspective, I think you did a fantastic job. I think the things you shared today were really helpful, are going to bless a lot of people.
Fantastic.
And I think for such a time as this, I think we have all of the leadership in the right spots, and you have an amazing team there. So
great team. Great team. We talk all the time about team. The titles don't get thrown around here at all. And we have an interesting philosophy that whatever happens, Dr. Sam, Dr. J, and I will meet and we'll say, okay, who's the best to take the lead? Doesn't really matter what our titles are. We want the best person at the point of whatever it is we're encountering.
Yeah.
And that just continues to foster and build that team atmosphere, that unity atmosphere, and that mutual appreciation and honor. And it's a fun day.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Bret, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it so much. I'm probably going to need to go back and listen to this a couple times. And maybe I can splice it together and it could just be a full sermon, and I'll take myself out of it. But
Well, you go ahead and repreach it the way it's supposed to be preached.
okay. Well, God bless you.
You
And
too.
thanks for all
Thanks
you
for
do.
having me, man.
See ya. All right. Just like that.